Welcome to ePro English Skills, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we begin the incredible life story of one of the greatest leaders in history, Nelson Mandela. This is not just a story, it's a journey of hope, courage, and determination. Listening to this story will help you improve your English vocabulary, pronunciation, and listening skills. But more than that, it will inspire you to dream big and never give up, no matter how hard life gets. So get ready for the most powerful and motivational story you've ever heard. Let's start the journey of Nelson Mandela, the man who changed the world. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small, quiet village called Mvezo, in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His birth name was Rolihlahla Mandela, which, in the Xhosa language, means pulling the branch of a tree. Some say it also means troublemaker, a name that would later reflect his boldness in challenging injustice. He was born into the Thembu royal family, a tribe known for its rich history and culture. His father, Gadla Henry Mpakanyiswa, was a respected chief and an advisor to the Thembu king. Although Mandela's family was not wealthy, they were deeply respected in the community. His mother, Nosekani Fanny Ammai, was a devout Christian who taught him the importance of kindness, humility, and faith. Mandela's childhood was simple, but filled with joy. He lived in a hut made of mud and straw, surrounded by open fields and rolling hills. There was no electricity, no running water, and no modern luxuries. But Mandela felt free and happy. As a young boy, he loved to run barefoot in the fields, herd cattle, and swim in the streams. He played traditional Xhosa games with his friends and listened to elders tell stories around the fire at night. These stories, often about brave warriors and leaders, ignited a spark in young Mandela's heart. One day, his father told him, "A real leader is not someone who wants power for himself, but someone who serves his people." These words stayed with Mandela throughout his life. When Mandela was only 9 years old, tragedy struck. His father fell ill and passed away. This was a devastating loss for the young boy, but it also marked a turning point in his life. After his father's death, Mandela's mother took him to live with Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, a royal leader of the Thembu people. Chief Jongintaba welcomed Mandela into his home as if he were his own son. For the first time, Mandela saw a world beyond his small village. He lived in the chief's palace, where he observed meetings and learned about leadership, tradition, and responsibility. Mandela began attending a local Methodist school at the age of 7. It was here that his teacher, Miss Medingane, gave him the name Nelson, as it was common for African children to receive English names in schools. Although Mandela did not understand why he needed a new name, he accepted it and focused on his studies. He quickly became a diligent student, curious about everything he learned. He loved English literature, geography, and history, especially stories of the African heroes who fought against colonial rule. Mandela often said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." This belief drove him to study harder and dream bigger. As Mandela grew older, he became more aware of the inequalities around him. South Africa was ruled by apartheid, a system that kept black and white people separated in every part of life. Black people were not allowed to vote, own land, or live in the same neighborhoods as white people. Mandela could see the unfairness everywhere. At the age of 16, Mandela participated in a traditional Xhosa ceremony where boys became men. During the ceremony, elders spoke about the responsibilities of manhood. But they also shared their sadness about the suffering of their people under apartheid. Mandela felt a deep sense of duty to fight for justice and equality. When Mandela was 19 years old, Chief Jongintaba arranged a marriage for him. But Mandela had other dreams. He wanted to continue his education and make his own choices. So, he made a bold decision. He ran away to the city of Johannesburg. The bustling city of Johannesburg was completely different from his village. It was vibrant but full of challenges. Black people worked hard for very little pay and lived in poor conditions, while white people enjoyed all the wealth and privilege. Mandela worked as a night watchman at a gold mine. While continuing his education, he lived in a small, crowded room and often went hungry, but he never gave up. He believed that education would open doors to a better future. Eventually, Mandela enrolled at the University of Witwatersrand to study law. He was one of the few black students at the university and faced our discrimination. But this only made him stronger. During this time, Mandela joined the African National Congress, ANC, a political organization fighting for the poor rights of black South Africans. He attended secret meetings where he listened to passionate speeches and shared his ideas for a fairer South Africa. Mandela dreamed of a South Africa where everyone, regardless of race, could live together in peace and equality. But the road ahead was filled with challenges, sacrifices, and pain. When Mandela arrived in Johannesburg, he was just a young man full of dreams. The city was alive with energy, but it was also full of challenges. Black people were treated as second-class citizens and forced to live in poor neighborhoods called townships. Mandela rented a small room in Alexandria, one of the poorest townships, and worked as a clerk in a law firm. The job was demanding, but it gave him a chance to learn about the legal system and how it was used to oppress black South Africans. He spent his evenings studying by candlelight, determined to finish his law degree. Mandela's hunger for knowledge was unstoppable. He often said, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." The ANC had existed for many years, but Mandela and a group of young activists believed it needed a fresh approach. They formed the Youth League, which focused on mobilizing young people to fight against apartheid. Mandela's speeches were powerful and passionate. He spoke about justice, equality, and the need for action. People admired his courage and vision. One of his most famous lines was, "It always seems impossible until it's done." While working with the ANC, Mandela met a beautiful and intelligent woman named Evelyn Ntoko Mays. Evelyn was a nurse, and she shared Mandela's dream of a better South Africa. They got married in 1944 and started a family. Mandela was a loving husband and father, but his commitment to the struggle often kept him away from home. Mandela's personal life was not easy. He had to balance his responsibilities as a father with his role as a leader. He once said, "There is no passion to be found in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living." In 1948, the South African government introduced new apartheid laws, making life even harder for black people. These laws dictated where black people could live, work, and even whom they could marry. Mandela and his colleagues in the ANC knew they had to act. Mandela helped organize peaceful protests, strikes, and marches. He believed in nonviolent resistance. Inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, thousands of people joined the movement, risking their jobs, homes, and even their lives. But the government responded with violence. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and sometimes killed. Mandela himself was arrested multiple times, but he refused to give up. He said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, it is inspiring others to move beyond it." Despite the challenges, Mandela achieved one of his biggest dreams. He became a lawyer. In 1952, he and his friend Pos Oliver Tambo opened the first black law firm in South Africa, Mandela and Tambo Attorneys. The firm provided free or low-cost legal help to black South Africans who were victims of apartheid. Mandela spent his days in courtrooms, defending people who had been unfairly treated. At night, he worked with the ANC to plan the next steps in their fight for freedom. In 1960, a tragic event changed the course of Mandela's life. During a peaceful protest in the town of Sharpeville, police opened fire on the crowd, killing 69 people and injuring hundreds more. This massacre shocked the world and made Mandela realize that peaceful protests alone might not be enough. The government banned the ANC, forcing Mandela and other leaders to go underground. They formed a secret armed group called Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. Mandela said their goal was not to harm people, but to sabotage government structures that upheld apartheid. Nelson Mandela became a wanted man. He traveled across South Africa in disguise, organizing protests and recruiting people for the struggle. He also traveled to other countries to gain support for the fight against apartheid. During this time, Mandela became known as the Black Pimpernel, because he was so good at evading capture, but his life was full of danger. He couldn't see his family, and he knew that every day could be his last as a free man. In 1962, Mandela was arrested and charged with sabotage, treason, and attempting to overthrow the government. He used his trial as a platform to speak out against apartheid. In his famous speech, he said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to Robben Island, a bleak prison off the coast of Cape Town. Life in prison was harsh. Mandela was forced to do hard labor in a limestone quarry. He lived in a tiny cell with no bed and only a thin mat on the floor. The guards were cruel, and Mandela was allowed only one visitor and one letter every 6 months. But Mandela refused to be broken. He used his time in prison to study, reflect, and plan. He even learned the Afrikaans Arn language to understand his enemies better. He also taught younger prisoners about leadership and the importance of staying hopeful. Mandela said, "I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. As the years passed, Mandela became a symbol of hope. For millions of people around the world, protests against apartheid grew stronger, both inside and outside South Africa. World leaders and organizations called for Mandela's release. But the South African government refused. When Mandela was imprisoned, many thought his fight was over, but the truth was, his imprisonment became the spark that ignited a global movement. As the years passed, Nelson Mandela's name became a symbol of resistance. His face appeared on posters, banners, and protest signs across the world. People chanted, "Free Nelson Mandela." In cities from New York to London, from India to Australia, the pressure on the South African government increased. Countries imposed sanctions, refusing to trade with South Africa. International sports teams boycotted South African tournaments. Musicians and artists refused to perform there. The world was demanding a change. Inside prison, Mandela remained a leader. Even in chains, his spirit was unbroken. He encouraged his fellow prisoners to stay hopeful. He once said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." In the 1980s, the South African government faced huge unrest. Protests, strikes, and violent clashes shook the country. The apartheid system was crumbling. The government knew that Mandela held the key to peace. But they feared his influence. In 1985, President P.W. Botha offered to release Mandela, but on one condition. He must renounce violence and stop the fight against apartheid. But Mandela refused. From his prison cell, he sent a message. Only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter into contracts. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. Mandela's words inspired millions. He refused to be silenced, even behind bars. Finally, in 1989, South Africa's political landscape changed. A new president, F.W. de Klerk, came to power. He realized that apartheid was unsustainable. The world was against it, the people were against it, and South Africa was on the brink of collapse. In February 1990, de Klerk made a historic announcement. Nelson Mandela will be released from prison. On that February 11, 1990, after 27 years. Behind bars, Nelson Mandela walked free. Millions watched on television as he stepped out of prison, hand in hand with his wife, Winnie Mandela, raising his fist in the air, a sign of victory. The streets of South Africa erupted in celebrations. People danced, sang, and cried tears of joy. The world witnessed history in the making, but Mandela knew that his journey was not over. Freedom was not enough. South Africa needed peace, unity, and a new future. Mandela and de Klerk worked together to end apartheid peacefully. It was not easy. There were violent clashes between political groups, and tensions were high. Some people wanted revenge, but Mandela preached reconciliation. He said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." In 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to bring peace to South Africa. Then, on April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections. where black and white people could vote together for the first time. The country stood in long lines, waiting hours to cast their votes. When the results were announced, the world held its breath. Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president of South Africa. On May 10, 1994. At his inauguration, Mandela stood before thousands, including world leaders and ordinary South Africans, and said, "We enter into a covenant that we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall, without any fear in their hearts, assured of their right to human dignity, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world." South Africa was reborn. The years of racism, division, and suffering were ending. As president, Mandela focused on healing the wounds of the past. He introduced programs for education, housing, and healthcare. He launched the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, allowing victims and perpetrators of apartheid crimes to share their stories and seek forgiveness. But Mandela never wanted power for himself. After just one term as president in 1999, he stepped down, choosing to spend his remaining years as a global advocate for peace and human rights. He continued his work against poverty, HIV, AIDS, and inequality, inspiring future generations. On December 5, 2013. At the age of 95, Nelson Mandela passed away. The world mourned the loss of a true hero. Millions gathered to honor him, and leaders from across the globe paid their respects. Today, Mandela's legacy lives on. His name is written in history as a fighter, a peacemaker, and a symbol of resilience. His words still echo. "I never lose. I either win or learn." Nelson Mandela taught the world that forgiveness is stronger than hatred, love is greater than fear, and no struggle is too hard when fought for justice. Hope you enjoyed Nelson Mandela's incredible life story. I'm sure this listening practice has also helped improve your English skills, your vocabulary, pronunciation, and understanding. So, keep watching, keep learning, and never stop improving yourself. Good wishes to you all. And don't forget to subscribe to Pro English Skills for more inspiring stories.